Father's Day weekend, U.S. Open weekend, and first guest, right off the bat, we got a great book here, 100 of the Worst Ideas in History by Michael Smith and Eric Kasem. But let's go to Michael Smith, the author. Michael, welcome to WNFL in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
John and Nick, great to be here.
Thank you very much. First thing I'm reading here, one of our guys that listens is going to love one of your 100 worst ideas, Babe Ruth being sold to the New York Yankees.
Oh, my gosh. That is an interesting story. We call it in the book The Bambino's Curse on the Beantown Bombers. And here's the bad idea. They actually sold the Boston Red Sox, the owner Harry Frazee, who was a Broadway producer and the owner of the Boston Red Sox, in 1920, sells pitcher Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. And yes, he was a pitcher back in those days.
Yes.
So after presiding over 5 World Series titles in 15 years back in the day, this Frazee character believes his team is strong enough to withstand the departure of its star pitcher, Babe Ruth, also known as the Bambino. So he's scrounging around for cash to finance his Broadway plays, and he decides to sell Ruth to the Yankees for $100,000 in cash, which is a lot of money in those days,
yes,
and today, and $300,000 in loans to finance his Broadway shows. So he can only really later kind of gape in disbelief as Ruth goes on to single-handedly transform the game. He becomes baseball's lifetime home run leader, the most popular athlete of his day, a charter member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, in leading the formerly downtrodden Yankees to 7 championships in 15 years. And on the other hand, the Red Sox endure 8 decades of flubs and blunders and near misses, each attributed to what they call the curse of the Bambino, on their way to winning 0 World Series titles between Ruth's 1920 departure and 2004.
Beautiful.
Absolutely incredible. It's funny to read your book, Mike. And some of the stuff, when you read them, I love how you give the background of everything, and each bad idea is laid out. Like, here's the bad idea. And then let me give you a little background on this. Here's what happened behind the scenes. Here's when the brainstorm took place. Here's sort of the beginning and how this thing ultimately unfolded. Sometimes you read some of these and you go, yeah, I can kind of see where they were going with that.
Well, our goal was to uncover ideas that you might have heard of but maybe didn't know an element of the idea that's been attached to it over the years, and then also present ideas that we're pretty sure you never heard of before, and try to lay it out in an interesting, easy-to-read fashion. I know I'm a sports fan. I don't like to sit and read novels and long passages and tomes and textbooks. I do like this kind of a format, though, because it's a single story per 2-page spread. It's got photos in it. It's for people who love reading, but in small doses.
Yeah, I love the XFL one. I was one of those people. When the XFL decided to do what they did, you went, okay, yeah, I kind of like this. Yeah, smash mouth football. Where's my smash mouth football? Let's do this.
Well,
and then it didn't really work.
It really sounded good in the beginning. We call this one 4th down and 70 million to go. And we blend here. The bad idea is blending elements of pro football and pro wrestling into a new sport that's called, as you mentioned, the XFL. And the idea is, we call it the geniuses behind this, are Vince McMahon, the musclehead behind the World Wrestling Federation, and NBC Sports. And this goes back to 2001. You know, I was thinking about this. It seemed like it was longer ago, but it was 2001. And they hyped it as a tough, high-energy, off-season alternative to the venerable, stodgy old National Football League, as they were looking at it then. Back then, if you remember, it was called the No Fun League.
Mm-hmm.
So the XFL games boast blaring rock music. They've got opposing players wrestling at a scrum at midfield to determine who gets the ball at the start of the game. They've got trash-talking coaches, no penalties for excessive roughness, lingerie-clad cheerleaders, which everybody likes. So the interest peaks and then quickly wanes as fans and the media soon kind of sour to the league's kind of phony pro wrestling style machismo and sensationalism, and really shoddy play is what it came down to. So in week 1, the XFL games garner respectable TV ratings, but by the end of the season, a game between the Chicago Enforcers, I love these names, and the New York, New Jersey Hitmen sets a record at the time for the lowest-rated primetime network show in TV history. All told, the XFL loses $70 million and suffers a sudden death, as we say, after a 10-game season.
What's really funny about it, though, now that we can look back on it, and some of these ideas will stay on the XFL one because this is an easy comparison.
Nick, if I can jump in, almost ruined the career of one of our friends.
Oh, Matt Vasgersian. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Out here, too, in California, there's a couple of NBC sports guys on local TV here who just could never live it down. It was so embarrassing for them.
Fred Rogan was one, right?
Fred Rogan, that's my boy. That's who I'm thinking of.
Fred's my old roommate from Arizona.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, I actually met Fred a couple of times. He's a great guy, but boy, did he look lost on the sidelines of these XFL games.
Terrible.
It is funny, though. There are still some residual leftovers of the XFL that we talk about now as though we're revolutionizing the NFL, where it was like, let's just get rid of kick. Why do we even do kickoffs? We talk about that on the show all the time. Why do we even do kickoffs? Why don't we just have the guys run out there and grab the ball? And it's like, well, that was an XFL thing. And the Lingerie Football League, which kind of spun off from the lingerie cheerleaders. And there are still some things that are around from some of these great ideas where the idea itself didn't materialize, but a few things in it weren't totally crazy, and we've kind of adopted those as norm now.
Yeah, that's true. The overhead sky cams are a holdover from the XFL days. The in-game interviews, helmet microphones are still in use today, and as you said, the lingerie-clad cheerleaders, if we remember, I don't know if it happened at the last Super Bowl, but in some recent Super Bowls at halftime, they had the lingerie bowl, which was, shall we say, two-hand touch between 7-on-7 lingerie-clad models playing what was loosely called football at halftime of the Super Bowl game.
We've got a lingerie football team here in Green Bay?
Of course.
Yeah.
You got to have one of those.
Yeah.
When you look at this, too, this spans, we're talking a lot about sports stuff, but you go through this book with everything from politics and pop culture, and the new Coke chapter is fantastic. We all scratched our heads when Coke decided to come out with new Coke. And sometimes when you look at this whole book in total, Mike, it's great to see that almost from start to finish, these ideas are ones that you go, why did you try to rethink the wheel? You had a wheel, and it was brilliant, and it rolled. And why do we keep doing this historically? Because you go way back in time.
Fixing it when it ain't broke.
Yeah, exactly. Just leaving it alone sometime is the best strategy in business.
Well, I think so. And in the book we've got all kinds of different, as you pointed out, stories from politics, popular culture, business, fashion, sports, entertainment, from the distant past and recent past. I'll give you a couple of highlights. I mean, we've got the famed archaeologist whose discovery of the missing link is actually revealed to be a human skull with a monkey jaw glued to it. But that was thought to be the missing link for all of these years. Complete sham. We've got the restaurant chain that names itself after a derogatory term for African Americans. We looked at that and said, really? And it's true.
Yeah.
We've got a hit singing duo who neglects to tell music fans that they can't really sing. We've got a sporting event that requires contestants to stick an angry animal down their pants for as long as they can stand it. Still goes on in Scotland today. They have tournaments over there called ferret legging.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, we've got all kinds of stuff. I mean, one of my favorites, if we've got the time, I'll tell you about lawn darts. This is another game. This is applicable to our sports show here. We call this the game that really sticks out in your mind. So, John and Nick, what would you call an outdoor game where you toss a weighted, foot-long metal-tipped dart high into the air in hopes it'll hurtle toward the earth and stick in the middle of a plastic hoop positioned at the feet of your opponent, say, 20 feet away?
Jarts.
I guess rhetorically you'd call it lawn darts, jarts, garden darts, or maybe just the most idiotically dangerous kids game ever invented. But here's Hasbro in the late 1950s. They've got this fun picnic game that unfortunately, sadly, kills 3 children. They were impaled by these giant darts. Over 6,000 more are injured seriously. We've got lawn darts being used as weapons in gang murders in the Midwest. And finally, after 30 years, in 1988, the Consumer Product Safety Commission steps in and bans the sale of lawn darts in the U.S. Today, you cannot even get them on eBay. But there is a city in Ohio, Bellefontaine, Ohio, that every year has a jarts tournament where the first prize is $300, and of course all of your medical bills are paid.
We talk a lot about stuff we did as kids and how we're still alive, and one that always jumps out at me, the slip and slide. That it had to have been tested. Somebody tested this slip and slide, but inevitably, we all bought them. Everybody in the neighborhood had them. And after one slide, your chest was so ripped up, and Timmy lost a nipple on one of the metal spikes that you actually used to secure this thing down to your rock-filled lawn. And yet they not only kept coming out with slip and slides, we made them into bigger slip and slides, and then we put a bump at the end of it so you could get airborne and land on the turf. And it's amazing, this stuff that ends up being sold.
And I love how our parents back in the day, I remember playing charts. I remember doing slip and slide. Parents sitting there in the lawn chair having an adult beverage and maybe a cigarette back in the day and saying, yeah, go for it, kids. Hey, that's great. You know, it's just a little brush burn. Walk it off.
You know, if you spray,
no big deal.
My uncle always came, if you spray Pam on it, you can really fly. And he'd go out there with the cooking spray and hose it down, and it was just incredible.
That's a beauty. I'll tell you, speaking of that kind of stuff, I've got one other if we've got time. I can tell you about.
Yeah.
This one we call the butt of a fat joke. And this is really, John and Nick, the quintessential American story because it involves a well-meaning company addressing perhaps the biggest concern facing Americans back in 1968 and maybe even more so today. And that concern is, how can I shove unlimited quantities of fatty snacks into my face without making my arteries harder than yesterday's linguine? Well, the food experts at Procter & Gamble back in the late 60s had the answer, and they call it Olestra. Now, this is a new chemically contrived, fat substitute, which means we can now consume vast quantities of potato chips and cookies, crackers, fat-free and worry-free. One problem. Olestra is soon linked to acute digestive illnesses. A short time later, the federal government mandates that all Olestra products carry a warning label that includes the possibilities, upon consuming these foods, of abdominal cramps, acid reflux, diarrhea, and a bizarre malady that they call anal leakage. So I hope all of your listeners out there having their cornflakes are not offended by that. But after an initial surge of public excitement, Olestra products dropped by 50% in sales in the first year, almost 100% by the second year. More than 20,000 consumer health complaints, and eventually Olestra's promise of shall we say, guiltless snacking becomes, as we say in the book, one big fat joke.
Yeah, the biggest side effect, we were one of those we jumped all over it. It was like, yeah, you got to have this. And I just remember the worst side effect being the most offensive bathroom tattooing that has ever taken place in our home. It was just awful. And it hit the whole family, Mike. It hit us all. We had this picnic, and so we had the Oleo chips, and we had all this stuff.
You actually experienced this.
It hit everybody in the house at the same time, and we thought my dad was freaking out because of cryptosporidium and all that. He was like, it's a damn cryptosporidium again. And then we figured out it was just the Oleo.
Well, I'll tell you, Olestra is still found in two kinds of products today. Deck staining products and machine lubricants. So you know that it's good for you.
Nice.
Yeah, we were well lubricated.
Where can people find your book, Mike?
I'm sorry?
Where can people find your book?
It's at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. You can also get it at 100worstideas.com and better retailers everywhere.
Fantastic. You're the man. It's a really, really cool book.
Thank you. We hope it flies off the shelves, as they say.
So it had to be a lot of fun putting it together.
Oh, it was great. It was great fun. We took about 3 years worth of research, and it never felt like work. I mean, we write all day for a living, my partner and I, but this was a joy.
Outstanding. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.